ISO. Changing your ISO changes your sensor sensitivity to light. So when you use a higher ISO, sensor's more sensitive, and therefore the exposure is going to be brighter. And a lower ISO is going to make the sensor less sensitive, and therefore the exposure will appear darker. ISO can be a very useful tool when you're using a light source with less power, less wattage, maybe like a speed light or a low wattage strobe. So if the output's too low, you can increase your ISO to compensate. And obviously what you're going to want to do is you're going to test for your camera what ISO you're comfortable with in the studio. In the past, high ISOs meant lots of noise, lots of grain, but with new technology, it's much less noticeable. You have to figure out your own threshold. Let's take a look at how ISO is affecting the exposure in the studio. Right now, my camera settings are 1/200th of a second, f8, and ISO 100. So it's the lowest ISO I have in my camera. I usually shoot 100 to 200 to keep it nice and clean. Let me take a quick shot to show you what the exposure looks like. All right, so I have a correctly exposed image. But let's say for whatever reason the image is a little bit dark. I can increase my ISO, and each time it's going to let in more and more light. I can go from 100, 200, 400. I feel comfortable going up to 1000. So let's just take a look at how I can open up the exposure, lighten it up a little bit by increasing my ISO. So this is 200 and 400. So this is another way I can control exposure. I also want to take a look. I'm just going to shoot a frame correctly exposed at ISO 1000. We're going to zoom in and we'll take a look at a little bit of the noise that is produced. I personally think it's completely acceptable. Because a lot of people, they're really afraid to bump up to higher ISOs. I'm going to bump up to 1000. We're going to take a look. We're going to zoom in, and I'm pretty sure you'll be fine with the noise. I know I'm completely fine with it. My recommendation to you, check out your own camera, figure out what level of noise you're comfortable with. So let me just adjust the light. Okay, and adjust my camera. Okay, and let's zoom all the way in. Okay, so you can see, I see a little bit more texture in the background, but it's fully within the range of what I consider acceptable. This is important for people that perhaps are using lower wattage strobes or speed lights, because you don't have as much output, and there may be times where you want to shoot at f11 or f16, or maybe use large modifiers that cut light. You need more out of your light, you need more power. Using your ISO as a tool for exposure is extremely important for those of you using less expensive or less powerful strobes and speed lights. These tools don't have as much output. So what's really great is if I'm shooting at ISO 100 and I bump it up to ISO 200, what I'm actually doing is I'm fundamentally making my light appear twice as bright. So it's going to be an extremely useful tool when the strobes or the light source that you're working with doesn't have enough power output to give you. For my settings personally, I try to shoot at the lowest ISO possible because I want to have the cleanest frame. And typically that's going to be ISO 100, ISO 200. That being said, for lots of different reasons, I've needed to increase my ISO in the past. And I think with my camera, I feel pretty comfortable going up to 1000 ISO with no noticeable noise. Higher ISOs are going to be really useful when you're trying to shoot with a lot of depth of field, or really low output strobes, or maybe really big modifiers that diffuse and cut the light, or if the light needs to be far away. Don't be afraid to vary your ISO.